The paradigm of the possibility field is an important one because the possibility field comes first. And within the possibility field, a smaller field is the probable field. And within the probable field, a single moment, a single point is the present actuality in all of its density. Now, possibility radiates out in all directions equally. For there to be a positive possibility, there must be a negative possibility as long as polarity, as long as the whole is cut into a positive and negative polarity, where the right side is positive, the left side is negative. For polarity to exist, there must be a positive and a negative. Therefore, for positivity to exist, negativity must exist. In order for white to exist, black must exist. And although we like to debate from a limited perspective, is good stronger than evil, these types of things, the reality is that polarity necessitates that when you cut the one in two, it is cut into two equal parts. It's not a polarity if it isn't equal. Now, the cut is somewhat arbitrary, but any scientist that is making the cut with language or technology into polarity will cut right down the middle. Now, what this means in terms of a possibility field, because a possibility field is radiating out, in our paradigm, 360 degrees, but infinite degrees and infinite amounts of infinite degrees. So possibility is a web that passes through all things and all time in all ways. Now, if you think of it as an interconnected web, one of the things that occurs is that the possibility field collapses if a single point on the web is missing. If you imagine it as a thread, then if you take a single point and interrupt the thread, the entire possibility field collapses. As soon as the possibility field collapses, the probability field collapses. And as soon as the probability field collapses, the actuality of the densest moment collapses. And then there's nothing to divide in half. And nothing exists. Now, within the thread of possibility, there is the possibility for nothing to exist. And within the void of nothingness, there is the possibility field. Because in order for nothing to be complete, there has to be no nothing. and then we get something. And in order for something to exist, there has to be a possibility field, a probability field, and a present moment. So within the completeness of nothing, we have the nothingness of nothing, which is something. And within the completeness of the possibility field, we have the possibility field, or we have the possibility of nothing. In essence, we have recreated the paradox of yin and yang, where at the center of both lies the other. It is the great serpent's dance of creation and destruction, of life giving rise to death, and of death giving rise to life. And we are looking at that dance, at this dance, through the lens of observing and measuring devices called senses that perceive energy on a certain dimension. And we're looking at this from a lens called cult or culture, a set of paradigms, a box. And you can look at the physical body as a doorway to perceive reality. Or you can look at it as a prison, as a cave in which to hide and avoid most of reality. Because if we have the one, and we want to relate to the one through the illusion of separateness, it doesn't work when we're the one. But if we can create a fractal representation of the one, an ego one, a tiny one within the bigger one, then we can look from the one to the one. And you can look at the body as a doorway to reality that this one allows us to engage. Or you can look at it in another way, which is that what the body does is it deletes the awareness of 99.99% of all that we are and all of the many ways that we are connected. And what it does is it leaves little pinpricks through which the awareness of interconnectivity can penetrate. That the body is a shield to hide consciousness and its interconnectivity from itself, but so as not to be in complete and utter darkness. We put little dots in the cage, in the cave, and let a little bit of energy, a little bit of light in through the little pinpricks. So the circle becomes the mantle of opacity that obscures interconnectivity. But then we put in the eyes and a little bit of energy gets in through the eyes, and we put in the nose and It's as if we've put a sack over one part of reality and obscured all of it, its relationship with the larger ecology. But then we put a couple of little holes in the bag. And a little bit of energy comes in, a little bit of light comes in. And we feel a little bit connected with the larger ecology of which we are a part and out of which we emerge and to which we will return. Every physicist will tell us that the energy in formation in our bodies was once part of the ecology around us and will return to the ecology around us. The energy is neither created or destroyed. It just migrates, cycles through different evolutionary forms over time. And in this form, part of energy relates to the ecological framework that gave birth to it and will return to it. Now, none of these paradigms are real. None of what I'm saying is real, because language is not real. Language is a metaphor, it's a symbol, it's a heuristic model that the human brain uses to interface with the much more vast and dimensional reality that surpasses the human brain's capacity to be aware of in its full complexity. So we take the one, we dumb it down with language to a level of simplicity that we can digest and process. And through that model of reality, we engage with all that is. We're always, in essence, engaging with our model. So while reality itself is symmetrical, balanced, filled with grace, our models of reality tend to be, throughout cult history, it's one of the things that makes them a cult, our models of reality tend to be unbalanced. And that model of reality, being off-center, creates an experience of dis-ease, of suffering, of pain. And the more pain that we experience at different points relating to reality through the lens of our model, the more feedback we get as to how far off-center we may be at a given moment in time. And through the innate drive in all human beings to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse, we explore the center. Through our models, we explore the center, often moving somewhat unelegantly from one polar extreme to the other. A few hundred years ago, Galileo was challenged, tormented. His life was in jeopardy because he looked at the stars with his telescope and he dared to counter a book from the dogma, in that case, the Christian dogma. Now, in many ways, Christianity is suffering as things flow to the other extreme, as the radical materialist, reductionist, rationalist try to convince us that anyone who believes in something greater than ourselves, that anyone who believes in purpose of any kind, is a fool. And through similar methods of withholding grants and political tyranny, anyone that explores the new alternative, which is now transcendence in any form, is threatened with excommunication. And just as the Christian dogmatists had faith that they were right, so the scientists have faith that they are also right. You know, the reductionists, the rationalists have faith. Faith in Occam's razor is one of the tenets, that if it can be reduced to a simpler form, it should be reduced. We have faith in Occam's razor, that the simplest explanation that reality can be reduced to is the way to go. Why? Why not have faith in complexity? Why not have faith in the idea that reality is so big, so complex, so paradoxical, that if you can possibly imagine it within the human brain, it definitely exists in some time space, on some dimension, along with a lot of other things that the human brain cannot imagine. And thus, it is highly likely over the next 1,000 years that exceptions will be found to almost every rule, that we don't have the ability to understand, that we don't have the ability to understand at this time, but that reality will just keep getting more and more complex, and that reducing things to the simplest possible expression is a wonderful exercise for a mind with low RAM capacity as a stopgap measure until higher technologies of consciousness are developed, which make the counterpoint, the idea that if it can possibly be imagined as something more complex than what we're imagining, then it is, becomes popular in a different technological environment of consciousness. And so we tend to seesaw back and forth from extremes, and we have wobbly wheels with a lot of dis-ease. But at the center, when we move, our systems take us through the center. Most of our systems allow us to transit near the center at different points. We get near the center, and when we're near the center, there's the sound of music, there's the sound of grace. We just visit with the center on our way to and from the extremes within our limited system of consciousness, which is our limited heuristic models of reality using our limited technology of language, as we pass from one thing to another. Now, this is exciting from a couple of different angles, because this idea, and remember the antithesis of Occam's razor, is that if it possibly can exist, then it does exist in some time-space continuum, in some dimension. Obviously, in the imaginal dimension, it certainly can exist. That a possibility field, as it moves around the circle, is a thread that, if broken at any point, the entire possibility field collapses. Much like a sweater being woven, that if you pull at a single point, the entire bit of fabric can be pulled to pieces, can be unwoven, and the sweater no longer exists. That it's a pattern of energy, a pattern of energy, a pattern of energy. And what this suggests is that reality is a synergy, that when we look at it through the lens of polarity, we have up and down, hot and cold, good and bad, male and female, masculine and feminine, different. Every woman has a masculine side, every man has a feminine side. Then, when we think of our, the illusion of separation, the ego, our relationship with this possibility field, obviously, the probability field is many thousands of percent bigger than the actual field. I'm making this video right now, but the probability, I could be having one finger on the table, on the floor, on this, on this. I have 1,000, 10,000, 20,000, 1,000,000 different places in the near vicinity where I can put this pinky. But I'm putting it here. So the probability field of all the different places where I could place this pinky, most of which, of course, are offset outside of frame, it's 1,000,000 to 1, 1,000,000,000 to 1. You start getting into probability fields like, could I get into a plane and travel to Denmark? Of course. And how many millions of places could I put my pinky in Denmark, right? So the probability field is millions of times bigger than the actual field. In actuality, my finger is here. And then we get into the probability field of where put this finger, and then the probability field of putting 4 fingers. And that's just the probability field for fingers. What about the probability field for all the things that I could say in all the different sequences of saying it? And we've got millions of things about that. And we've got all the different hand gestures that are possible to be made. So we have probability upon probability upon probability. Then we have just, let's not watch videos. Let's watch a show. Let's write a poem. And what is the probability field of poetry? How much, how many variations, how many poems are probable? And so we have a vast probability. And then we have a possibility field that is many, many times bigger, exponentially bigger than the probability field. And so we're here in this moment relating to our probability, relating to our possibility. And then the question becomes, what is our relationship with our probability field? And what is our relationship with our possibility field? And one of the interesting things to consider, if we look at what's going on within the framework of human consciousness, what's going on? What's the function? What's occurring within this illusion of distinction? And I say an illusion of distinction because you can trace every atom in this finger all the way back to the Big Bang. But you can trace every atom in every other part of the universe all the way back to the Big Bang. Now, if it all emerges out of the same seed, and if it's all part of the same tree of time-space, how separate can it be? How separate is it? Except through the knife, when viewed through the knife of language. The language that says this is a finger, that's a table, that's a person talking in front of a video. They're just words. And we say this word is different than that word. But of course, does one word make any sense when it's not connected to other words? Does one language make any sense when it's not connected to other language? Because every language being spoken today has evolved out of other languages. So presumably, if you snipped out a section of time-space, then that evolution that brings us to the present stops, in the same way that every human being has evolved out of an intergenerational evolution of the species. Some hundreds of thousands of years ago, every single human today was being made probable by sex on the African plains. If we go back 10,000 years and cut out one generation of human beings, the entire tree of humanity stops growing. So how are we not connected to every human being that has ever walked the planet? How are we not connected to every animal that ever has been, is, or will be? Do we not influence the animals, the plants that will be by our behavior today? Is there no relay of information between the present and the future? What about a farmer who plants crops today? Doesn't that relate to the crops that they will harvest in 6 months? And what about the thought crops? If we plant thoughts today, do those thoughts not bear fruit 100, 1,000, 10,000 years from now? 10,000 years from now, couldn't a competent scientist with the right measuring devices track this thought that emerged out of this thought, 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 and come all the way back to the present moment, to what you're thinking today, and see how that energy form ripples out throughout time? And couldn't that go back until the first words were spoken, when humans descended from the garden of the uninterrupted consciousness of the One? into the polarity of distinction? Could one not follow a thread from any point in time-space all the way back to the Big Bang? And could one not follow a thread from the Big Bang all the way to the far extremes of time-space, both now and in the future? And if one can, are things not all connected at some level? Now, if all things are connected through the web of the possibility field, and if a possibility field radiates out equally in all directions, what does this mean for deleting a single possibility, a single probability, a single actuality? Deleting it, taking it out of the fabric of time-space. Could you delete one thing and still keep everything else? Now, in the actuality field, within a given moment in time-space, it seems like we can. But what about in the possibility field? In the actuality field, I can say I'm going to skip breakfast today. But what if I deleted breakfast from the possibility field? It's not possible to have breakfast. Well, what else collapses with that? What is it about breakfast that's impossible? Well, if you broke up time, if you said, well, we're just going to delete the time slot of breakfast, so you can't have breakfast because we're going to take the morning out. Well, time is a circular rhythmic journey. Could you have an afternoon without a morning? If you look at it mathematically and you think, well, I'm going to take 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, and that equals 4. I can see the 4. It's kind of hiding for you. And that equals 4. Could you still have 4 if you deleted 2 of the ones? If you deleted 3 of them, could you have 1 equals 4? Not really. And so you couldn't have an afternoon that didn't emerge out of a morning. You couldn't have an evening that didn't come out of the afternoon. And if the afternoon wasn't there because there wasn't a morning, at what point, let's say if you took the circle and you deleted, we break the circle into 360 dots and we call them each a degree. We could break the circle into 1 trillion degrees. It's just we would have to stop being so lazy and count to 1 trillion in order to speak about disease. We'd have to say 988 billion degrees, and we'd have to really pay attention, and we don't want to. And so we just break the circle into 360. It's somewhat random, but it's close to the amount of days. And so it's useful. So we break, but if you deleted a single day from the year, could the next day occur after the deleted one? And if you deleted a single degree in the circle, like you're turning around, you get to this one point in your pivot and there's just nothing there, and then could you continue the next thing on the other side of the nothing? And I'm not sure that you can. I mean, I don't believe that you can have an afternoon after deleting the possibility of morning. I'm not sure that you can have a circle after deleting the possibility of 1 degree. I'm not sure that you can have anything if you delete anything else or anything from a possibility field. Because if you say that one thing is impossible in a possibility field, then you cannot say that everything is possible. And if you delete the one thing and everything is connected, then you start to delete everything else bit by bit. If you delete black, you can't have gray. If you delete gray, you can't have the dark shades of color. When you're mixing colors out of the 4 colors, black and its grays, etc., there's a lot of those colors are mixed in there. You can't have the RGB, red, green, and blue. They mix together in certain ways to create black. If you take away the black, you also have to take out the various intensities that mix together to make that color. One thing leads to another. Now, where this seems to be leading, and it's worth referencing this kind of dynamic of yin and yang, because within the one extreme lies the other. Where this seems to be leading is that in order for anything to be possible, everything has to be possible. And that in order for anything to be probable, there has to be a possibility field. And in order for there to be an actuality field, there has to be a probability field. So in order for this moment to exist, everything is possible. And on the dimension of reality that is possibility, everything that can happen is happening. And this then leads to a relay of energy between the present moment and the probability field and the probability field and the actuality field. And we relate to the actuality field, the probability, and the possibility field through the lens of paradigm, through the lens of language. And as part of that paradigm and as part of that language, we have broken the world into 2. We have descended from the garden into the knowledge, into the language of good and evil. And looked at through this lens, there must be evil in its entirety for there to be good in its entirety. Now, you can see some of these bits in a certain way. You can see pieces of this that clearly link up. And then the vast majority of reality is not only unknown, it's unknown, which means it's not only invisible, it's invisibly invisible. We don't know most of what we do not know. But if we think of heroism, for example, how can you be a hero and rescue someone who is not in trouble? So there's obviously a link between being a hero and someone being in trouble. If nobody's in trouble, you can't be a hero. it's a little bit more abstract, that there must be a link between good and bad, because for there to be good people, there have to be bad people. Because, well, for one thing, you've got these endless continuums. So if you have a continuum that is endless, that there's kind of an evolutionary trend towards endless goodness, it has to be in relationship to something that is less good. Otherwise, it's meaningless. The language good doesn't mean anything. You know, back to that, old analogy of is water real to a fish that never leaps out of it? Now, a fish that leaps out of it has a contrast point. Now, to help someone must be helped. To bring well-being to someone must have a lower state of well-being, meaning if I want to relieve someone's pain with morphine, if they're not in pain to begin with, you cannot relieve their pain with morphine. You can dissociate them with morphine, you can numb them with morphine, but you can't relieve pain that isn't there. You cannot teach someone who isn't ignorant. So there's a connection between teaching and ignorance, because you cannot do one without the other. If there was nothing to teach, you wouldn't be ignorant. So what makes you ignorant is the fact that someone has something to teach that you don't know. If you know it, then the person doesn't have anything to teach. So you have to not know something, but someone else has to know something that you don't know, or there's no teaching. So there's a connection between learning and teaching. The same is true with communication. To say something in a meaningful way requires it to be heard. If neither the person speaking or anyone else hears what is being said, has anything been said? There's a connection between speaking and listening. Can you give something when somebody will not receive it? If I say, I really want to give you this gift. Here's $100,000. Now the person says, no, I'm not interested. Here's $100,000. Now the person walks away, and the $100,000 stays on the ground. Can I give $100,000 if somebody will not receive $100,000? It becomes somewhat meaningless, doesn't it? Here's $100,000, and the other person walks away, and whatever. If you wrote a check, it's just laying there on the ground. So there's a connection, and also if somebody already has your $100,000, you can't give it. So they have to not have that $100,000 to begin with before you can give that $100,000. So this creates a picture of a great web that from all different angles in all these different ways is moving from one to the other, from one. If you do not inhale, you cannot exhale. If you do not exhale, you cannot inhale. So it suggests that there's this great web. And then it suggests that at any point in the web where people are, there are egos, separate illusionary distinctions of identity created through language by blocking out most of, you see, because in order to create an individual, you have to block out massive amounts of awareness. Because if we look around and feel and see our interconnectivity with all things, there is no individual. We're just part of all things. So what do we have to do to create an individual? Well, we have to forget where we came from. So we have amnesia. Consciousness starts at birth. We have to forget where we came from. We also have to tune out vast amounts of knowledge, vast amounts of energy flows that are between us and our ecology constantly, radiation, heat. We have to tune all that out, because if we truly saw our interconnected, multidimensional relationship between all that is throughout time, we wouldn't feel and identify with being an individual. We would experience being part of an ecology. So we have to block all that out. And that's how we get to the illusion of the isolated individual. Then from that illusionary perspective of the isolated individual, we look out through paradigms and through language at different things. We say, that's good, that's bad, that's painful, that's pleasurable. Pain is bad, pleasure is good. Or we wire it the other way. Pain is good, pleasure is bad, if you're a Christian or guilt-ridden cult member of some kind. Then is the other way around. But most of us have a sense of strong polarity. And of course, within the extremes of that worldview, then, the world would be a better place if half of the world didn't exist, half of the possibilities didn't exist, and half of them did. And then we can say, well, what are we doing as these isolated individuals somewhere in the possibility field of time-space? And we could say, well, we're moving around. We're moving through the possibility field, hour by hour, day by day, movement by movement. We are moving within the possibility field. And if there is a connection between all things, some important connections and questions become, do we love what is? Do we not love what is? Do we understand the relationship between what we do not love and what we love? If we do not love certain things that are interconnected and related to other things that we love, do we really love the things that we say we love that are connected to the things that we say we don't love? You can think of things such as discipline. A lot of my discipline comes out of terror. Now, if I didn't have the terror, then would I have the discipline? Initially, there's a connection. Then there's a discovery of value. But would I discover the value of discipline without the terror? Or language. In other words, would we discover ecology if there was not an environmental crisis? Would we choose to vacate our cult in favor of transcendence, being aware of things at a global level, if there was no ecological crisis? And so does ecological suffering and crisis correlate with a sense of cultural transcendence? And could we reach our potential as a species without cultural transcendence? So if we think of the ego as a ring and the thread of possibility migrating through every possible moment in time-space in all directions. And if we think of life as the breath, of course, if there's no breath, we're dead in a matter of minutes. If there's no relay of energy in and out, if there's no dance between the polarities, there's no life. If there's no movement between the polarities, there's no movement. If there's no movement, there's no life. The question is, what creates flow and what stops the movement? Judgment, anesthetic, resistance, avoidance, denial, these are things that stop movement as we traverse the probability field, the actuality field, the probability field, the possibility field. We get to things we don't want to see, we don't want to acknowledge. And life gets harder there. Life starts to bog down there. We start to get harder there. You can think of a lack of forgiveness as one of the block. I'm not forgiving that. I don't forgive that. I can't forgive that. I won't accept it. I won't forgive this. But of course, there's also the paradox. Can I forgive the one that will not forgive? Can I flow with the one that cannot flow? Can I accept the one who will not accept? Because within the possibility field, within the long and winding road, within the tapestry of mathematical possibility, one must, in order to have the possibility of acceptance, have the possibility of unacceptance. In order to have the possibility of getting stuck in grief, there must be the possibility of flowing into grief. In order to have the possibility of flowing into grief, there must be the possibility of being stuck, not grieving. The question is, where do we end up residing? Where do we spend the most amount of our time? And one of the areas that we spend the most amount of our time is the area that we will not transit through. So you can kind of imagine that we've got a globe here. And we're flying around the globe. And we're flying around the globe. But in Tokyo, we find something we cannot accept. Child pornography, suicides from overwork, whatever it is, that is unacceptable, right? We're flying out, because we're going through, nope, that's unacceptable. So we do not allow, we do not accept, we do not tolerate what we're seeing in Tokyo. So as soon as we say, I don't accept this, I won't accept this, I can't accept this, I can't believe this, I don't believe this, I will not tolerate this. This is wrong. This is da da da. As soon as we do this, we interrupt the flight. Because we can't move through something that we judge, fear, reject, hate, deny, refuse to look at. We end up getting stuck there. We can't flow through something we fight. Because this thread is flowing through things, but we cannot accept this, do not accept this. And reality is always bigger than we are. So in a given situation, we may or may not have control, but we never have control of the entirety of the possibility field. And so if we have the position that we cannot and we will not accept this, ultimately we encounter an energy pattern that is big, and we effectively stop our movement. You could think of it as a border. You're about to get on the plane. Someone says you have to be strip searched before you get on the plane. You say, no, that's unacceptable. That's okay, you just don't get on the plane. But that's unacceptable too. Well, that's fine, you stay at the airport in protest. You don't get on the plane, and you stay in the airport protesting the unacceptability of that. But at some point, we'll encounter something that's bigger than us that we may not accept or want to accept. But if we do not accept it and do not acknowledge it, then we stay in the airport unless we're kicked out of it, protesting, 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 protesting. For how many weeks, months, years? Before we let it go, or it consumes us, and our entire reality becomes that which we will not, do not, cannot accept. I will not accept this. I cannot accept this. It consumes us to where what we cannot accept and move through becomes the biggest part of our reality. And this is an interesting paradox, because that which we cannot accept becomes the reality, the biggest part of our reality, because we can't move through it to the next thing. If we can move through a separation with one person, we may move into a relationship with another person. But if we cannot move through the separation, then we don't have the other person, but we also don't have the next person. I can't get over this. How could they leave me? I can't get over this. How about we go on a date? No. You don't understand. I can't get over how this other person left me. I don't have time for you on the date and this and that. Yeah, I can't get over that. I can't move through it. I can't continue my loop. I stop. Moving through here, 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 moving through here. And then I find this thing that I cannot accept about myself, about you, because they're the same thing, right? I cannot accept this about you. So obviously I cannot accept it about myself. And within the possibility of self, there is the possibility that that part of me exists. I cannot accept that. And so there's this stranglehold on the possibility field, a rejection of all life emerges here. And so there's resistance and there's flow as one of the polarities. But we tend to go deeper and be more present to our resistances. We can see this, electrically. We can have electricity flow through a body and move on, etc. And we can have electricity flow through a wire. But where we see light is in the resistance. When there's an interference pattern of a filament, and then it continues, light glows not because of the frictionlessness, but because of the resistance. The light flows because of the resistance. The light emanates because the flow was interrupted. So resistance leads to more consciousness, but also to a lower state of flow. So we have this tension between the descent into consciousness with its polarity and with its suffering, and the grace of the unconscious flow, of losing oneself. One of the most ecstatic states is to lose all sense of self and become part of something bigger than self and lose the edges, to merge with divinity, with something transcendent. It's the most blissful state imaginable. It's ineffable. You can't put it into words because words take the ineffable, the one, and cut it up into bits. And the one heals the wound of the cuts, restoring the unity. And once restored, we cannot cut it up into language. And so it is beyond consciousness. It's beyond words. It's a return to the garden before or after the knowledge of good and evil. Hi, I'm Dane Rose. All knowledge begins with a paradigm, and out of that paradigm comes an idea, an awareness that we adopt, reject, or synthesize into something better. It doesn't become wisdom, it doesn't become useful until we take action, until we integrate it into not only our thoughts, but our feelings, our body, our words, and our way of being. For that to occur, we have to move from the passive media paradigm into more active engagement. In the link below, in the More Information section, is an invitation to join a very small, deliberately filtered, high-quality discussion with a group of people who share a common language and want to work with these ideas, with me and with one another, with the sole goal of creating 10 times more sustainable well-being for ourselves and those around us per unit of energy invested. Thank you for watching.